Great stuff. Welcome back, everyone. Helen, thank you so much for teeing us up in that way. When Catherine Lascarette rang me last September to know if I would do this, I was just mentioning this to Laura, but I just got a little thrill of excitement that I was going to have this opportunity. I may well have been the fifth person she rang, I don't know, and it doesn't matter. We're really thrilled to be here, and in particular just to acknowledge that this is a really, it's a fascinating moment to have an opportunity to be in conversation with you, Laura, because as we were mentioning, we were in conversation just before the lunch concluded, you are, well, you're not, I'm not going to use the phrase that you're stepping down, but you're more maybe concluding this phase, and we'll be concluding this phase with the EPA, I think, at the end of January. And so we have this rare moment to reflect with you on your career, maybe looking and, 2011 when you joined the EPA and on, but also maybe reflecting back also on, how your formative years might have influenced and shaped what followed. So if you'd like maybe just to share some of that with us. Okay. Just what was going on in those earlier years and its influence on maybe where you've come to.
Okay, brilliant. And first of all, thank you so much for the invite as well. I was also thrilled to be invited. I'm not sure if I was the fifth person as well. And it's an interesting time for myself. I'll be finishing up with the EPA after 14 years as DG and 20 years, and it's absolutely flown by. And when I look back, I would say to people, I never thought I would be in the EPA, because actually when I was growing up, there was no EPA anyway. Even if you want to think of it, it was only established in 1992, 1993. A very brief background in that I'm from Dublin. I now live in Wexford. I'm from Dublin. My father was in the Army. He was Director of Engineering in the Army, which meant he travelled a lot and was public service in its very core, in that he was in the Congo and Cyprus and Lebanon and all of these really difficult places. And my mum was a pharmacist, and she worked all my life, and she also had her own pharmacy, which she set up in her 50s, which was quite old. So I'm taking this as inspiration now that there may be a next phase. And why I say that, even with regard to my mother's, it was quite unusual at the time. We thought it was normal, but it was quite unusual to have both parents working full time. And I am the youngest of four girls, highly competitive sisters, so we still are. I kind of say at some stage we'll grow up and get over it, but we're all very competitive. My father, as I said, was an engineer. My grandfather was also an engineer. In fact, he ran away in 1915 to join the British Army to fight in World War I at the age of 16. He came home, as you can imagine, but he died very young. That influenced my father, and it probably influenced us all as the kind of generations went through. So my father's an engineer, my grandfather's an engineer, my sister was an engineer, and then when I was looking to see what I'd do in school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so engineering seemed kind of the family tradition, and hence I went into engineering. And I should say, I absolutely loved engineering. I wouldn't say I was a born engineer, and when I kind of left college, it was in the midst of the recession, one of the many recessions in Ireland. I left in 1992. Most of my classmates headed off to the UK or elsewhere. I was fortunate enough after many months to get a job in sales. So I sold pumps and valves to the pharmaceutical industry. Very exotic, but it was actually at a time when the pharmachem industry, particularly around Ring of Skiddy, etc., was just really developing in Ireland. So it was this industrial wave that we were seeing. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I went into the even more glamorous world of shipment and export of hazardous waste to other countries, because you had the pharmaceutical industry. They generated a lot of waste. Ireland was not and is not self-sufficient in how we manage our waste. So I did that for a good few years, including then kind of moving on from shipment of hazardous waste to looking at building infrastructure for waste in Ireland. Difficult, controversial, first planning permissions for waste incinerators through the country. And I spotted an advert in the paper that said, Director of the EPA wanted, and I thought, well, try that. It looks really interesting. And I would have come from being in a regulated community, with the waste sector. And came into the EPA as a director in 2004. My appointment was not universally welcomed at that stage by lots of people, actually. Mainly from, I was going to say, more it was because I was poacher turned gamekeeper, or so was perceived. Numerous, including political system, condemned, actually. My appointment was condemned at one stage, so that was the start of the EPA, but it has been a fabulous journey. So I did a number of years in communications and corporate service. It was really interesting to hear Niall's presentation earlier in the communication side, corporate services, and then I went into licensing. And at that stage, we were doing licensing, I'm looking piggies and poultry, as we would call them, and also started wastewater licensing, which only came into being in around 2008, 2009. And in 2011, Mary Kelly, who was the Director General of the EPA, has stepped down. She was moved to Mbor and I was fortunate enough to get the gig. I probably didn't know what I was letting myself in for. Yeah. But as I said, the agency has gone from strength to strength, and I've been privileged to be involved in it. But I've been privileged. When I took over as DG, we were around 300 staff, budget of around 55 million euros. We're now up 550 staff, budget of 91 million euros. Huge range of functions. And very relevant to everything that's going on around the country.
Yeah, what a journey, Laura. So many aspects to it. I suppose interesting thing, your parents, there was an entrepreneurial aspect to it, there was a public service aspect to it, your own career, sales, that engineering thread, sisters, the competitiveness. Sometimes it strikes me that there can be moments in our career where we learn something about ourselves. And I'm just curious, was there a moment along the way where you realized that you had or sort of saw it in yourself? Maybe, I don't know what the phrase to use is, I'm going to say the stomach for a hard decision. Was there, was there something there and said, there's more that I can do here?
I would say one of the things, and I was actually, when I had to disappear off earlier on today, one of the things that what I was doing was actually to do a briefing for the new selection committee for the new DG. And one of the things I was saying to them, that whoever takes on the role or in my perspective, needs resilience. Because I do think, for any of us who've been a certain amount in a career or a high-profile career, you need that resilience, need that what I would call bounce-back ability. I was fortunate in my career to have had a number of challenges, no more than loads of people in the country. I was made redundant at one stage, and that I think is something that it can go either way for you. And for me, it was one that I was able to then say, no, I'll, dust yourself down, you get up, you go again. And I would have to say, when I worked in the waste industry, maybe that was when I really saw the resilience and being able to make tough decisions, because we were making tough decisions around infrastructure development, in going for planning, in dealing with communities, in dealing with industry. And those were extremely tough, and going into to public meetings and coming out the other side. So that was probably quite a defining moment. I don't know, and I'm always loath to use these kind of the gender things, but the more I see it, the more I see that women are less likely to put themselves forward for certain roles, or to maybe have as much confidence, where the women I see around me, including in the EPA and in other roles, are so good at their jobs, but sometimes need a little bit of the push. Yeah. And I was fortunate that I had that. And so, as I said, certainly in that kind of the waste industry, that probably gave me a bit of the kind of backbone steel to be able to make tough decisions.
Yeah, no, appreciate that, Laura. I'm having flashbacks to this morning's presentation. We had that piece on good conflict and bad conflict, and I'm thinking of that contention that you would have experienced. So much in that, but I'm going to go back to 2011, perhaps, and the appointment as DG of the EPA. So I think the EPA, Ireland was very different in 2011. It was, we'd just gotten over maybe the sucker punch of the IMF coming in to bail us out. Even just from a global environmental perspective, there had been that disappointing conference of the parties in Copenhagen in 2009, very much pre-2015 and EU Green Deal and all of that. So I'm curious as to how you perceived the role in 2011, and within that, the perceptions that you may have had that came true, and indeed maybe what might have surprised you by it as time went on. Yeah.
And I'm probably constantly surprised, and still surprised. What was like in 2011, and I was in the agency going for the job. One of the things, like the public sector was under attack. And there's just no doubt about it, because the country was in such a difficult position. There was, and people may or may not remember, there was very much this kind of narrative about the public sector, in a very negative narrative about it not delivering, it being, self-entitled people and all of these things, which wasn't reflective of what I saw around me in the agency and wider public service. So there was quite a negative atmosphere in the country at the time. And of course, also there was big cuts to public servants' numbers and actually also salaries. So you had a group of people whose salaries were being cut on an ongoing basis. Numbers in employment in all of the agencies was either being cut or you weren't allowed to replace staff as they left. And even for us, say for our senior managers, it went to a stage that we had, say, 12 very senior managers, and it was going to be 5 to do more work. And that just wasn't tenable. But so that was kind of the atmosphere that was there. When I went for the interview for DG, one of the things you had to do was kind of give your vision or what you perceive to be kind of the issues, challenges. And for me at the time, I really looked at it and I thought, we are, and I can pull this out somewhere, so I'm not just saying it. What I could see at the time is we'd been so reliant on particular types of industry that then, when things went bad, went really bad. And what I could see was agriculture and tourism being absolutely the backbone of the Irish economy. And both of those sectors needing a clean, green environment if those sectors were going to continue to thrive. And maybe to some of the discussion this morning, that it needed to move away from, Ireland is clean and green, and for both of those sectors to actually being able to prove it. Yeah. And therefore to be able to show there's a direct connection between the environment and the economy. Yeah. And up to then, I would still say people were thinking about the environment as something else over here. When we sort out other stuff, when we sort out the economy, when we sort out social issues, we'll get to the environment then. And I suppose my narrative, and I still firmly believe it, is you can't separate those things. What I wanted to be able to demonstrate was the environment and agriculture, tourism can all go hand in hand, and they're interconnected. So that was that was my pitch for what it was worth. In the context of what surprised me then, I suppose what really surprised me, one morning I woke up to hear the news that the EPA and the Radiological Protection Institute were merging, which was it was great to hear it over the airwaves. So that was a big, you've got your path and you say, okay, this is kind of where we're at. We want to have closer connections. We want to engage. I kind of also felt at the time that the EPA was a little bit insular, that we weren't out. We were kind of doing our work, but not particularly good at engaging with stakeholders with regard to it in an outward way. And so you're kind of on a particular path thinking we'll do this, and then something comes in from the side, which was a merger, which was very, very time consuming. And an agency, we were kind of all about the environment, and actually the radiological protection side were all around health. And we're kind of going, how are we going to merge these cultures? Actually, ultimately there was huge advantages to it, or we found huge advantages, which is when you talk about, I was talking about agriculture and tourism and the importance to the environment. But equally, when we talk about environmental issues, if you just talk about, the environment in itself, I think you don't necessarily connect with people. Whereas if you talk about the environment and its association with your health and well-being, as we saw during COVID and other periods, like air quality, why are people interested in air quality? It's around health. Water quality, each of those are actually linked to health. Why are EU directives put in place around the environment? Most of them are ultimately around health. So although it was a surprise and it took a lot of work to merge the organisations, actually I think it gave us a greater focus on health, which was ultimately of benefit.
Yeah, no, appreciate that, Laura. By the way, we're going to go to you for questions in a few minutes. We'll continue the conversation, then we're going to, I think Seamus has a roving mic, and we're going to take in some questions as well. But Laura, I just want to maybe just touch, there's so much in that that we could pick up on, but I'm going to pick up on the merger between the Radiological Institute and the EPA. And as you mentioned, yes, you're bringing together two cultures, it sounds like, health and the environment. And maybe just from your own leadership perspective, what did that ask of you, or what did you need to discover about yourself at that time? I don't know if the question makes sense, but is there something there to explore?
Like what did it ask? I think it was really and maybe kind of again coming from an engineering background, which is quite solutions focused. And actually, when we were talking about the merger and the culture of the two organisations, the perspective of our RPII colleagues was that the EPA was very an engineering culture, actually very, doing, and they were more of a humanist culture, and we were kind of looking at them kind of, they're too much touchy-feely, and we're more sciencey, even though we're all scientists. What did it challenge me? I had to. That people side of things. And maybe again that being a defining moment, because the longer I'm on in my career, the technical solutions you can find, actually it's all about the people. And that was difficult. We people in both the EPA and the RPI were very, very nervous about the merger. They were very cautious. They didn't know it was a big change, didn't know what they were letting themselves into. And I remember a colleague of mine who's since passed on said, people won't remember what you say, but they will remember how you made them feel. And actually, so much of the work around the merger was, we had the technical things about websites and pay grades and all of those sorts of things. But it was around trying to connect the two groups of people, humanize each other in a way, get to know each other, what makes each other tick, lots of things like, simple things like working jointly on what the values would be for the new organisation, working, having kind of barbecues and things like that together. So things that maybe in my younger part of my career, I'd be going, oh, geez, just get on with it. Actually recognising the importance of the people side. And I suppose that since then, that's probably fascinated me more and more, including I've done some work now in system psychodynamics and all of these sort of things. So it was a great learning. Yeah,
and just think there's so many connection points with what we heard this morning and those experiences on both panels of scholars, actually. Let's talk about communication, perhaps. Maybe that's a way into this. And much of maybe what we heard this morning was, on the one hand, you need to own the narrative. Maybe might have been one of the threads. The other threads that we heard was, well, it's a very sort of multivocal environment. Issues are complex. There are multiple perspectives, and at the same time, you need to speak with authority and with one voice. So there's a tension there between the two, I feel, that perhaps gets to the heart of why leadership might be challenging and difficult, because try to thread that line. Just speak to that generally here. Yeah. And I think for the EPA, I must say I really resonated with the conversation this morning, because I think actually a lot of it was translatable. There is a bit about owning the narrative, but also being clear about what your role and mandate is. And maybe a lot of what I've done over the years is to have that relentless focus on
what our role is, because often people might want you to be saying something, even from an internal perspective, and say, well, you're the EPA, or you should be saying X, but really focused on where our expertise is and where we can add value. And that's in the context of communication, but I think what also came out in the discussion this morning is communication isn't one way. And I think sometimes as a regulator as well, because that's kind of, we are regulators to our core, we can think communication is that we'll tell you and then you will do. But I think the agency has really evolved to, in the context of communication, to be much more outward focused, but also much more engaged with different stakeholders and listening to stakeholders. And it was I must say, I felt it, kind of, you're talking about your bit of pride. I felt really a huge amount of pride when Lorcan Allen was referring to one of my colleagues this morning, because I think that didn't just happen. All of these people put a lot of work into it. I was saying to somebody over lunch even, it's a story for us, whether it resonates with yourselves, is when I came into the EPA, the relationship between the agriculture sector, I would say, and EPA was very tense. And quite hostile at times. I was probably on both sides, there was no right and wrong. But one of the things I thought we should do was to go down to the ploughing championships and go down there and exhibit at the ploughing championships, with which everybody went, "Oh my God, no! How? You're mad." And we went down the first year, and people actually enjoyed it, and then we went down the next year, and now people are like queuing up in the EPA to be some of the people on the exhibits, even when there's been really difficult discussions about nitrates derogation or whatever it might be. But it just shows you have to actually put yourselves out there a little bit. So that's in the communications. It was a lot more, first of all, really focused on who we are, what we do, and then much more trying to engage and connecting with different people, different organisations as well.
No, appreciate that, Laura. And as I recall, one of the values that the EPA has is effective voice. It's listed there. And then, of course, you're left with the question as to how do you use that voice and to what purposes and as to what end. I was reading something recently. There's a guy called Dave Snowden. He's a complexity theorist. And he was observing that you never change somebody, if that's what it is that you're looking to do, through argument or through facts. All that you can do is to perhaps facilitate a different type of experience for them, and through that change might happen, which I thought was an interesting way of thinking about it. I just want to come back to this idea of voice, effective voice. This idea as to when to step in, when to step back. And if you don't mind, I'm going to reflect back, or just invite you to reflect back on that famous Me tweet, which I think you might be familiar with, but I think it was about 2 years ago, and the EPA published a tweet, I think just to the effect of, eat less meat or whatever.
Oh,
and the sensitivities. I mean, if you like, the whole, all the interest groups reveal themselves, if you like, as a result of that tweet, and there was maybe an element to stay in your lane, and maybe to a certain extent then maybe you did stay in your lane because the tweet was withdrawn, and again there was another sort of smackdown. You got to stick with the facts, speak the truth. And I'm just relating that back to effective voice. And maybe there's something here, and again, I think it might resonate with some of the topics we had this morning.
And I think it's a really interesting one. And I was at a senior management group on Wednesday, and it came up because it actually came up at the weekend. And some of you may or may not have read the Irish Times, in which they were saying about the advertisement for the new DG, and the title was, Opportunity for Director General of the EPA, Humour Optional. Thank you very much. And I think the reflection I had, and I always have to remember, this is my reflection. Other people in the agency will have different perspectives on it. We had done a lot of kind of work around the communications, and including communication surveys, and what came back was the EPA was big with men over 50 who read the Irish Times. Now that's quite a niche audience. I always say it's not to dismiss that audience, and a very important audience, but we're saying we're not hitting younger people. And specifically then said we would go out and try and engage more on social media. And a lot of it worked, but I would say, this is one that where, we got it, didn't get it. I should explain. Every press release that is released from the EPA comes to me before it goes out. And the reason for that is ultimately that's the voice, that's the effective voice, that's the message. A part of the reason is the people, when they're working on their technical things, are looking at particular messages, but I will be looking at it maybe sometimes from a broader perspective. And so we have quite a strong, the directors are involved, nothing happens by chance. There's a strong governance. In the social media, that wasn't in place. And we knew it, and we're beginning to get a little bit concerned about it. But anyway, long story short, I came home from holidays and stepped into the office in September 2023, and I got a call from a member of our advisory committee who's a farmer, and said, Laura, what on earth have you put out? And he said it to me, and I said, if we're saying something, first of all, it sounds a bit unusual, but if we're saying something about meat and eat less meat, I would presume we've just said the Lancet has said X, and there. Anyway, as soon as I saw it, and it's not, excuse me, but this happened. It's back to what can you stand over in integrity, and I looked at it and it said, if you want to be healthier, wealthier, more fabulous, eat less meat, and it had a picture of a woman from Sex and the City, and it's just, oh God, I think was the general, and there is a time that you have to say, we got it wrong. Yeah. Now, at the same time, the comms people were getting communications in and a lot of upset. And you can kind of hold and say, no, we'll leave it up and we'll, whatever. But we can't, we couldn't stand over that. To say to people that you'll be wealthier, more fabulous, forget about health, just the whole thing. So just said, and knew, once something like that's up there, it's not that if you leave it up, there's a consequence, and if you take it down, there's no consequence. Whatever you do, once it's there, whatever you do has consequences. So stepped into that, aware that it will be perceived as we're bending to pressure, but still saying, what can you stand over a period of time? And so yes, once we took it down, we then had the environmental NGOs very upset that we took it down. So I was saying it's one of the times I've managed to upset everybody, actually all stakeholders, and it is the gift that keeps on giving. It was a really good learning for us, for me, about stepping into maybe social media, or and it could be something else. At the moment, we're trying to do more work in using AI, like lots of organisations. But really, what we've done is put up all of the guardrails, the governance, and then the rules of engagement, and then are going to people within the agency and saying, you can use AI, Copilot, or whatever it might be. And that was a big learning from it. So, look, if I could go back again, would I take it down? Absolutely. But something's going to happen at some stage. And then, I suppose, the bit that upset me nearly was the way the pile-on, and the assumption nearly of bad intent on all sides. And you kind of thought, well, we spent a long time building up relationships across, NGOs, industry, agri-food sector. And maybe what surprised me was the pile-on so fast to assume negative intent. Yeah. And even still, in some quarters, the feedback of, you were put in your lane. And I remember Daniel Murray, actually, from Sunday Business Post, came on to me and he said, look, and they were calling it Tweetgate, can you put, a quote? And one of the things we wanted to be really clear on is to say, yes, we've taken this down, there's time for humour, this is not a time, and it is actually a really complex, sensitive issue. We already heard about it this morning. We are not experts on diet, and that's to be really, really clear. There should be a debate, but doing it via tweet is not the way to do it. But what we did add on at the time in the response, and I wanted to be really clear on it, is saying, in the context of people saying that we've kind of ceded to the agri-sector or being bullied or, whatever, look at all of the reports the agency puts out.
Yeah.
The agency will call out whomever it is without fear or favour. So whether it's the political system, whether it's the agri-sector, whether it's Uisce Éireann, whether it's industry, peat industry, So that's the bit I still resent. You'll see a bit of emotion coming, because I think to say we were just kind of kowtowed, we were, put in place, when you look at all of the information we put out, but when we put it out, it's science, it's data and evidence.
Yeah.
So,
Really appreciate that, Laura. I have to say, from my own perspective, I think that tweet, when something emerges in an unplanned way, it can really reveal what's actually going on, because it's when things are unplanned, well, you can see the interests, everything becomes obvious. And I thought it served that purpose. Might be my 2 cents on it. And I thought it was fascinating from that point of view. But I just want to pick up on just what you concluded on there, Laura. And it was a little bit actually in John Keane's presentation this morning as well. I was picking up on the politics of regionalisation for TB testing, and while good idea in theory, but politically, is that going to, how's that going to wash? And just picking up on that again, the role of the EPA, when the science and the politics, the political vibes at the time, not aligned with the science. I think that maybe speaks to the whole clash and maybe the confusion around the word sustainability. I think Lance might have mentioned that this morning about, how do we define sustainability? And it speaks to that idea, because you have this clash between politics, economy, and what the science is saying. Just your thoughts on navigating that? Just your experience on it.
But certainly my experience is it's back to being really clear on what your role and mandate is as an organisation. I gave you an example earlier. Maybe I'll use this example because people it may or may not resonate with people. I always think it's one that kind of brought it home to me. In the context of the water charges and all of that debate that was happening at a point in time, I would have had people within the EPA, and for every good intent, saying the EPA should be out saying there should be water charges. Look, the debate that's happening, we should be stepping into that debate. And the response was no, and the reason why is the EPA will call out an underinvestment in infrastructure, in water infrastructure, which there absolutely was and still is. But our role is not to decide where the money comes from to address it. We can call out and say it needs investment, but it's actually a policy decision of where that money comes from and how it's done. Yeah. So, and I don't think that's kind of avoiding things at all, but you're actually recognise, well, where's our added value? Our added value is saying, look at all of this evidence, look at all of this data, this is what we're seeing, this is the science. If you start stepping into politics or a kind of an activist type role, we will lose our credibility. So, I've dealt with the political system now, over the last 20 years within the agency. And I've always found, to touch wood for the next few months, but that if we're clear, this is what the science is saying. Yeah. The science, the data and evidence, this is what it's saying. That is respected. Now, equally, the political system may say, thanks very much, but we're still doing X. But we will still say, look, greenhouse gas emissions, this is what's happening, or whatever it might be. So it's not, and because I don't even like the description of, and I know what you're saying, kind of stay in your lane. It's more that this is where our expertise is. This is where we can add value. Yeah. The political system have a different role. They are also democratically elected to represent the people to make certain decisions. Our data science evidence should feed more into the policy system. There was a review by the OECD. We asked the OECD to review the EPA in 2020. And it was a very positive review, but one of the things they had said to us is that we were probably a little bit too cautious about interacting with the policies or making recommendations to the policy system and needed to make ourselves more relevant. Well, I look now between 2020 and 2025 and the engagement the EPA has with the policy system, it is completely different, and we have put more and more data out, made it available, translated it, to make it relevant, because there is the old adage, there's no point being right if you're not relevant.
Yeah.
And actually explaining what our data means, making it more timely. We now have the nitrates every quarter. We've got the nitrates results. Greenhouse gas emissions every quarter, trying to make it more relevant without trying to determine what the policy decisions are, but we're giving all of the evidence and the tools that we should.
No, really appreciate that, Laura. And the evolution in the EPA from 2020 to now, and how it plays that role as a policy input, at least, is really fascinating. I'm going to have one more question, then we'll go to the audience and see what's bubbling up for people. But I maybe again just extending what we're just on, but just what are your thoughts now on that idea of system change? Particularly from an environmental perspective, and maybe even if we look at a social perspective on our relationship with housing or whatever it is, we talk a lot about system change. Very tricky subject. What have you learned about that? Or
it's very tough.
It is. Yeah.
And I think we sometimes also throw it out and say, and I include, ourselves with, it needs systemic change. But actually, how you get that systemic change is so difficult. And though in some areas, if you look at the industrial sector in Ireland. A lot of point source pollution back in the 90s. That has been a systems change. You don't have that. You look at the waste sector in Ireland, where we were sending waste to dumps, a lot of pollution, etc. Now you've your 3 bins outside your house. You've access to systems to separate out the waste. All of those sort of things. That has been a systems change, but it takes time, and it takes back to kind of the people bit. It takes a lot of engagement. You can't impose a systems change on any system, as far as I can see it.
Yeah, no, really appreciate that. The impossibility of impose, because the system changes of its own accord, and we're all part of it. Laura, thank you. I'm just going to go to the audience just to see what questions. I know Seamus is up there. He's got a roving mic, and I'm just curious as to what's bubbling up for people. Great.
Hi, thanks very much, Laura and Geoff. That's brilliant. My name is Marina Conway. I'm a 2025 Nuffield Scholar. And just, Laura, a question. You mentioned, every quarter you're reporting on greenhouse gas, you're reporting on water. And I know, the Environmental Protection Agency, you're reporting on the data, but I would assume that an awful lot of people who work for the EPA work for it because they care about the environment. And often the data that's coming out is not meeting the targets that we're setting as a nation. In particular, I'm probably thinking about the land use change and forestry sector. My background is in forestry. I know we have afforestation targets that are never being met. And so just 2 questions, do you find that sometimes disillusions your staff, and how do you manage it? And then the second question is just your thoughts on Professor John Fitzgerald often refers to the IPC licensing system, regulatory system that you have within the EPA, that would be a better system for issuing activities around forestry activities. So rather than having to prepare 44 documents for a 5-hectare felling license, where we're putting all the work at the outset into assessment, rather than just having a regulatory system where we know what we have to do and that we could get on and do it, if you have any comment on that.
Simple regulation,
And in the context, do people get disillusioned? I think it can be really tough, for people, because everybody, like the agency, we're all citizens of Ireland as well, and always and want the best. And I think it can be very frustrating to feel that maybe we're saying the same thing again and again, and is the dial turning? And hence trying to celebrate successes where those happen and recognise the good things. Now, one of the things we did in the State of the Environment Report 2024, because I think, and look, I think it's human nature, we can all focus on the negative, But in the SOER 2024, we looked at the differences between, so kind of, actually it was the 70s to the 90s to now. And there are a huge amount of positives that have happened with regard to whether it's kind of lead in the environment, whether it's sulfur dioxide in the environment, a number of other things, the seriously polluted rivers, etc. So sometimes those environmental changes do take a long time. But yeah, it is frustrating. And it's kind of going, you know, raw sewage and water is one that we've been kind of saying, great, we're now, you know, have moved on. So I think you need to look back and see where we were, and at times over a time period, and say, yeah, there's a big there have been big positive changes, but yeah, it can be extraordinarily frustrating. It can be frustrating to feel that for me as well as all of the staff, to feel it's a bit like Groundhog Day. You know, we're back here again. But as I said, lots of good things have also happened, so just need to balance that, because I think if you keep only talking about the negatives that happen, you know, it's not particularly inspiring. You know, you have to kind of to recognise. Myself and John do have arguments about the EPA taking over forestry, and I'm not convinced that will suddenly be a solution to a very complex and as they say, wicked problem. And you know, he has said it in the context of, you know, the EPA should just license, and my comment back was, well, how? Would it be that we'd end up stuck in a similar situation as in now with regard to, you know, appropriate assessment, etc., with regard to forestry? And when I talk to colleagues across Europe, which I do, Ireland is very different in the context of forestry. In other countries, there's a lot of forestry, and they're trying to make sure that forestry isn't cut down in protected areas and protect that forest. In Ireland, we're trying to increase afforestation, including maybe near areas that are sensitive. So I don't think a simple solution of moving the licensing from one agency or one body to another is. I think there is a fundamental engagement and discussion, including, and I'm sure it is happening, and it's not directly, that engagement at an EU level saying, look, if we want to have, and if we say afforestation is really, really important, well, there's going to be balances and consequences. And, you know, I think there's a discussion that needs to be had about, and we're starting to have it at the European Environment Agency, about it's not all win-win. There's going to be some things that if we do this, it will have this consequence, but we overall still think this is the better thing to do. And I don't think we're good at having those discussions, that things are either good or bad. But as I said, if we're going to have afforestation, and we're going to have all of that level of ambition, we have to find a way of tackling some of those wicked problems. As John always says, well, the EPA should do it, and I say, thanks very much, but no thanks. I think it's really complex, to be honest.
Yeah, I love that theme of complexity. We have another question, Seamus. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Kevin Toomey here. I also chair the Blackwater Catchment Programme. So just within that programme, there's 6,400 farm businesses that we need to engage with and implement practices. Some have engaged and are working away. But part of the feedback is obviously, you know, from farmers, is it working? What results will we see? You know, so just in terms, we're looking to source some equipment and measure locally at different points along the catchment, which is obviously difficult enough to get all the measurements. But just at the water conference 2 weeks ago, it was mentioned that the frequency of measuring, you know, has a massive influence on the let's say the risk, or not the, what's the word I'm looking for, the margin of error on the reports. So, you know, one of the things it showed, there was a 30% margin error measuring monthly versus weekly, so that's quite significant. So just in terms of the reporting you do, in terms of, do you have margins of error on your reports, or are we measuring often enough? Are we accounting for weather events and weather cycles over a period of years, and the lag phase of practice has been implemented? So it's just to try and catch that do we have those marginal? Because at the end of the day, the reports the EPA publish and the narrative we have in them is all that we're judged on from a national and a European viewpoint. There is no one else measuring water quality. You are the reporting body. So have you a margin of error in the reports? Because I haven't seen them printed. So and if the margin of error is significant, does it have a significant bearing on the results? Thank you.
Well, with regard to kind of water quality monitoring, and the purpose of the water quality monitoring that we're doing is all around the Water Framework Directive, and that has to be peer reviewed right across Europe. It has to meet kind of frequency standards, etc. And it's different parameters are measured at different frequencies. So I suppose, long story short, we are absolutely happy to stand over those results that we publish. And we publish also raw data for people to see on an ongoing basis, so you can go into individual catchments and look at that. There is also, because there's been conversations and comments before about the likes of, say, for example, I know Teagasc are doing really good work in Timoleague, a different catchment, but doing a lot more frequent monitoring at in a much smaller kind of area. But when we've been able to compare one with the other, it's still comparable. But what I would say, and I suppose I'm conscious in my head when you're talking about the black water, is the purpose of that is overall water quality over periods of time. And even in the context of the recent fish kill, our types of monitoring, if something goes into the water and as a point source, and we will see that the water quality was good before, we'll see the water quality was good after. Its purpose, we won't be on every piece of every river. It is that overall status for Ireland. And as I said, absolutely happy to stand over that, absolutely happy to provide all the raw data, which we do. It's peer reviewed. Our network is as good as any and better than an awful lot right across Europe. So we're happy, absolutely happy to stand over the science. And also we've developed, and we're over the last number of years in the context of our catchments unit, Jenny Deacon was mentioned here, is to be really looking at source apportionment as well. So where are, in the context of high levels of whatever it might be, where is it coming from? And then around 140 data sets, so you have the value, and then you're looking behind at all of the data sets to see where the source of particular pollutants can be. So I would say happy to stand over, second to none with regard to the types of water quality monitoring that we would have.
That's really one of the themes we had this morning as well, isn't it? That to speak with authority, you have to have the work done. It's not sound bites. Appreciate that. Thanks for the question, Kevin. Thank you, Laura. Anything else coming up from the room that you'd like to, any curiosity?
I suppose, Geoff, I might just ask Laura a question. It's a comment more than anything else, really. I suppose we heard today that the average age of a farmer is 60, and that's where I am. So in terms of use of technology and stuff, I'm not as good as the younger generation. And I just think in terms of reporting and looking at the EPA maps and stuff, they're not user-friendly. I find that it's hard to find out, for me as a farmer, to find out exactly what's the information around my catchment and the river that runs along beside me. And I think if farmers were more aware of what was actually happening outside their farm gate, just along on their river bounds, they would, knowledge is empowering in terms of taking action and all that. So just in terms around the information piece,
And I think we can always do better. But what I would say is, over the last number of years, and actually it was one of the times we were at the ploughing championships, and you now can go onto the EPA website, you can put in your air code, and you will see all of the information around you with regard to water quality. We'd lots of people, farmers and non-farmers, coming in and putting the air code and then saying, deleting it, kind of saying, make sure that it wasn't kept. But we put a huge amount of effort in trying to make that information more available. Look, I said it can always get better, but literally we have they're flag maps now that you can go in, you can put where you are locally. You can go, I was on it the other day, go into the EPA website, put on that local information, and you will see all of the data with regard to also pollutant load, nitrogen load, phosphorus load, that's in your local catchment. So there's a huge amount of information there. We are trying to translate it to make it much more user-friendly, but recognise, look, we can always do more in that space. And actually, that's one area that we would have engaged quite closely with DAFM as well, and other stakeholders. So sometimes we can produce the information, but it might be that the likes of DAFM or the Law Pro colleagues, so colleagues from the local area water protection officers, they would then maybe translate it and work with local farmers as well. So sometimes we provide the data. It mightn't be as user-friendly as you'd like, but others can take it and act as an intermediary as well. So I hear you, absolutely, and probably more we can do in that space as well.
No, I was just thinking as you were speaking, Laura, and thanks for that observation, Seamus, is I think it was Einstein that said, things should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. And I think it's an interesting line. Sometimes there can be a demand for simplicity, but then we can simplify beyond the level to which the information remains useful. And there's always that tension, I think. And maybe I'm hearing it a little bit in the comment. Laura, I just want to maybe as you reflect from this perspective on your career and what you've done, what are you most proud of?
Oh gosh, what am I most proud of? I tell you, because what I'm most proud of is I was kind of talking earlier about the connections, the engagement of the EPA. And again, this is an area we can always be better. But actually, our reach into society, I think, has really improved. Our reach into the agriculture sector. Look, we can agree, disagree, etc. A bit like conversations about conflicting, tensions earlier. But I think we are much more outward focused and much more engaged. So that's kind of one area I would be. And then the other bit is around the relevance of the EPA. I would say now our science, our data and evidence is absolutely relevant to decision making right across Irish society. So looking back, it's kind of that maybe broader piece, but I suppose in the agency we're always, we tend to look forward. We're actually, and this is genuinely one of the things we're always saying, we actually need to sit back and kind of look back a bit. But I think, the relevance of the EPA, we're talking about the challenges to trust in science. The trust in our information is high, our science is high, because we take such pride in it. Those sort of things.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think your presence here today speaks to that. Actually, it's modelling exactly what you have spoken about. And again, you're sort of moving to a new phase of life, perhaps, Laura. What might keep you awake at night, or what are the concerns you might take with you? If I can ask that question.
What are the concerns? One of the concerns is the agency has really grown the range of functions we've been asked to take on, and it's constant, more and more coming our way. And it does worry me that we spread ourselves too thinly, or we're asked to spread ourselves too thinly. So that is always a kind of a concern. And it is that broader external environment, that the geopolitics, we're talking again social media, how how do you make sure that the types of information that we are so proud of, the type of work that we're so proud of, it is seen as that into the future. And back to the meat tweet, this idea of a pylon so quick, if the agency makes a mistake at all, we live and die by our reputation. And so maybe that's the big thing that keeps me awake at night. When you have so many functions, something goes wrong over here, it would have an impact right across. And the work we do is too important to allow for that reputation to be damaged. And look, we all know it takes years and years and years to get a good reputation. You can lose it very quickly. So that's I suppose will be the thing that I would be concerned of. But like the agency is such a, again, we can agree and disagree about results and all of that. But as a resource in Ireland, I think it's something that people should be really proud of, because not every country has an independent, trusted environmental protection agency.
Yeah, and that's so important. And as you just say that, I'm thinking about the challenge of living in a post-truth world. But we come back to that. Seamus has another question. Yeah.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm just going to continue the trend, I suppose, of questions around water quality from the audience, given its relevance. You'll be aware perhaps you were involved in it, Laura, but we hosted the EU Commissioner for Environment and Water, Jessica Roswell, in Ireland last week. And I was just wondering, would you mind sharing with us, if you were asked to comment for a moment in a meeting with the Commissioner at Roswell as head of EPA, how would you frame the current water quality situation from with agriculture being a priority, pressure on that? How would you frame our current status? Thanks.
Well, it's whether it's the Commissioner or anybody else. We published in October, we published our most recent water quality report. And what that has shown, I'll talk about maybe because that we do thousands of different points monitoring over a couple of years. And what that has shown is there's been a gradual decline in water quality. And in the context of, say, nutrients like phosphorus, it has also shown where we take action, there's been positive results. In the context of nitrates, what that has shown over that period is that there has been positive results with regard to actions taken with regard to nitrates. However, the levels are still too high in the south and southeast of the country. So there have been positives, but more needs to be done. What's more disappointing is the quarterly indicators on nitrates. And what we had been seeing was good reductions, and there has been a bounce back up with regard to nitrate levels in rivers. And maybe back to an earlier question of kind of, we're equally frustrated when we see that. Now it is one quarter, and we'll have to see how that goes. But it is a warning sign of, is it weather? Is it price of fertilizer? And now more fertilizer is being put out. What are the reasons why we're seeing that kind of bounce back up again? But look, long story short, in the context of the water quality overall, we are seeing a gradual decline. Now, maybe at one stage we're kind of saying it's stabilised. We have lost, we don't have as many of the highly polluted rivers that we had previously, but what we're just seeing is this, as I said, this gradual decline overall. When you take it overall, nitrogen, phosphorus, ecological quality, etc., there is a decline.
Yeah. I really appreciate that, Laura. Thank you for the question. And we have one more. I'm conscious now, we are 2 minutes over time. So with Catherine's position and Laura's permission, we'll take one more.
Thanks very much, Eamon Sheehan. I'm a 2017 scholar. Laura, just on that as well, that decline over the last number of years, equally our population has grown quite substantially. There's over 500,000 private septic tanks that aren't being policed. You've equally got over 600 wastewater plants that are being tested once every 3 years. So I suppose from a point of view, from support of our derogation farms and where we're at, there's a lot of effort being put in, there's a lot of money after being spent, and there's a lot of livelihoods at stake on the back of it. But I feel from my own point of view, our farms have spent a lot of money doing a lot of the right things, and it's very hard when we look at neighbouring houses or areas like that, or wastewater plants that aren't being fully policed to the best of their potential.
Okay, well, we're going to have to agree maybe to disagree in the final question. I suppose the first thing I would say is we're the environmental regulator of Uisce Gair, and we take that role extremely seriously. And we have taken enforcement action against Uisce where there are issues, and we've taken legal cases against them. But more importantly, we are that oversight. We measure. It's not measured once a year. There is constant measurement with regard to the outfall from wastewater treatment plants. And we report on that. And what we are seeing is, overall, the impact, and back to we can identify the sources of pollutant. What we are seeing is it's not just agriculture causing a problem with regard to water quality. It is also forestry, it is also hydromorphology, it is wastewater treatment plants. And we have apportioned that. Agriculture is the biggest source. It had been going up. It is now effectively, I would say, stabilised with regard to impact. Wastewater is the fourth biggest source. It has gone down because of investment, and there's been multi-billion euro investment. But it's not one's bad, one's good. There is an overall impact from a number of different sources, but agriculture is the largest of those sources, and that's what we're seeing, back to science, data and evidence. In the context of septic tanks, there is also a regime in place there with regard to monitoring inspection of septic tanks, which is overseen by the EPA onto local authorities, and they are targeted at areas of highest risk because, again, we have the science, the data, the evidence. We know where there are the more vulnerable areas. We know the more vulnerable areas and the number of septic tanks, and we require, for example, those local authorities to do significantly more inspections than local authorities where it's less vulnerable and less septic tanks. So there is a monitoring and control regime for septic tanks. I would hate people to go away and think that the EPA are saying agriculture is bad with regard to water quality and everybody else is. There is challenges across a number of areas. When we're sitting in front of Uisce, we're identifying where they need to prioritise investment. We are also identifying that they haven't maintained the plants that they have invested in to the satisfaction of the agency, and we've been coming down hard on them with regard to that. But it isn't one or the other. We need all sectors kind of lifting the game, to be honest with you. And what we've seen, and back to what I was saying there with regard to the water quality report, what we have seen is, for example, and specifically I talk about kind of phosphorus, where action is taken, we do see the result. With regard to nitrates then, we've seen in areas where action is taken, there have been improvements, but the east and southeast of the country is still a particular challenge.
Yeah, no, really appreciate that, Laura. It's really interesting, the questions that are coming from the audience and that emphasis on water. There's one more question. Is it on water and nitrates or? It's an observation, Michael. Yeah. Brilliant. Let's go with it.
To wish Laura every success in her next phase of her career. And I think she has led the EPA to an open, engaging institution that 10 years ago, 12, 15 years ago, it certainly was not. It was a suspicious institution with heavily regulatory powers, and industry approaches were always, I think, maybe met with a certain amount of certainly skepticism, definitely a lot of suspicion, and definitely a lot of no's, because everything suggested from industry at the time were regulators. That's our role, and it doesn't. It's not our function to go beyond regulation. And I think Lorna has personally, but with her team as well, at least opened up the EPA as an organisation, as an institution, with her regulatory powers still very much in her bag, but engagement with industry as to how, in a positive way. And I want to just recognise that, Laura. I've seen it, witnessed myself in different, I suppose, in my own career, different roles, but particularly in the last few years, where it's now open discussion. It may not change the regulatory intentions of the EPA, but at least we have a better read on the industry side as to where the ambition for the environment and the ambition for the regulation. Previously, it was like in my school days, take the medicine, and we don't explain whether it will kill or cure, but we know it's good medicine, and we have the best medicine in the business. So I want to say, Laura, well, we appreciate that's not Laura's no easy touch, but nor is the EPA. because they have amazingly, draconian powers, I would say, in some ways. But I think they're being used in a way, and there's an engagement now that is more enlightened, and I think better for the industry and hopefully better for society as well. I just want to say that.
Great stuff. No, really appreciate that. And I think it sums up your description of your journey and what you feel most proud of. I think was actually the execution or the bringing to life of the accolade that Michael shared with the room. Laura, thank you so much for making time for Nuffield Conference today. I think it, and your contribution, I think they exemplify what Nuffield works on, and I think actually really manifested in this morning's presentations as well, which is about intelligent, informed information sharing, and if you like, the collision of different perspectives productively in that positive form of conflict that we heard about in the session this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.